we'll start doing going around and doing introductions while some other folks are joining in. Um, Welcome to the last day of winter of 2025. Yeah, so spring comes in tomorrow, um, and I think we're all ready. Anyway, Eldon James with the Rappahannock River Basin Commission as we start another year. And the initial commission meeting of the year will be next Wednesday. We'll talk just a little about that after our main presentation. But let's kind of go around the room here. We know Don McGowan is on, masquerading as, oh, I don't see that name anymore. Anyway, so if you see Marianne Peterson, it's really Don McGowan. Jackie, you've got your camera off. Why don't you go first?
Yes, I'm Jackie Rickards, and I'm a senior planner with the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission. Thanks.
Very good. Hey, Kirk.
Hey, Eldon. I'm Kirk Havens, Director Center for Coastal Resources Management at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, the Batten School of Coastal and Marine Sciences.
Well, that's a mouthful.
It is. I'm required to say it.
Yeah, I understand. All right, let's see. Tommy and the Eagles.
This is Tommy Blackwell, friend of the Rappahannock from Essex County.
Your backdrop is great there, Tommy.
Thank you. They're still there.
Sarah.
Sarah Parmalee with the Piedmont Environmental Council covering Culpeper County.
Lisa.
Good morning from the Northern Neck. Lisa Hall with the Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
All right, and we'll jump up the basin. Michelle.
Hi, Michelle Edwards with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
Harrison.
Morning, Harrison Preman, Culpeper County Planning and Zoning.
Good morning, Harrison. Brian.
Good morning, Brian Johnson, the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation.
And Bryant.
Good morning, Brian Bays with the Virginia Department of Forestry and the Regional Forester out of our New Kent office.
Great. We may have a couple more join. And Don, I see you're properly labeled now. Welcome. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Andrews, and she's got this lengthy title herself. Take it away.
Yeah. Good morning. Eldon and I tease about that all the time. I don't know how we get stuck with these long things to say, Kirk, but we do. I am with the University of Virginia. I am with the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation. And this is the part I cringe at that Eldon makes fun of me for. It's Distinguished Law and Policy Fellow. And before that, last year, I was, scarily enough, the inaugural practitioner fellow for the UVA Environmental Institute. Sometimes it feels a little bit like EIEIO, doesn't it? The Environmental Institute, the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation. And so when I started that fellowship, they asked me, what would you like to research? Which is a pretty cool question. How often do you get that question? Not very often. And I had been before that lucky enough to partner with VIMS in running the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William and Mary Law School for some years. And so been working in this kind of adaptation arena for years, and said, I'd really like to do some research and talk about how, the big gorilla, the big elephant in the room is managed retreat. It's a term that's become politicized, and it's a term that's come to mean lots of things. But really, local governments have been planning for risks and hazards for years and years. And it's simply another step along that spectrum. And so they said, great. So I started doing my good old white paper research, do a little legal paper, and got a lot of feedback along the way that people really wanted more of a hands-on guide, that too often white papers end up on the shelf and don't affect policy as much as you'd like. Sometimes they get traction and they change policy, but too often it's not easily used and read by many. And so there was feedback it would be very helpful to have a guide. Back when we had the first Coastal Resilience Master Plan Technical Advisory Committee, another long term, another TAC, the former administration had assigned one of the subcommittees to write a relocation handbook for local governments. And so we toiled on that task in a subcommittee, and then it got dropped and it never happened. And so people pointed to that and said it would be nice to have something that might be helpful that local staff or electeds could use, or community leaders that want to help engage in an adaptation planning for their community. So that's what I did. And I want to walk you all through it. I'm very excited. Thank you, Eldon, for inviting me to be here this morning, because a small group of folks who will really be the hands-on users of a guide like that means that I can count on you all to give me some straight up, honest feedback. I presented this one time before to the Wetlands Watch Lunch and Learn group, and I told them this is a tall order. I'm asking you to give me feedback, and they did a great job. So you guys have a precedent you've got to live up to. And tell me, there's no pride of authorship here. If it's not user-friendly, if it needs to cover something else, please speak up and let me know. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through the guide, and then we'll have a Q&A session, and I'll just ask you guys to speak up and ask me questions. So does that sound good, Eldon? We on track time-wise? Okay. So Jillian, I'm going to share my screen because I have the power to do so. There we go. And can you all see that, I hope?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Great. Thanks. All right. So I'm going to move your faces off the screen a little so I can see what I'm doing here. There we go. This is the home landing page. And as you can see, it's called a Proactive Planning for Resilience Guide, Protocols for Community-Led Climate Adaptation in Virginia. It's Virginia specific. We have case studies from different parts of the country and the world, but it is Virginia specific. And there are a couple ways to maneuver. One is to simply scroll down the page, and you can see we've got 5 steps that we outline. There's an executive summary and things you need to know about adaptation planning, a user guide and table of contents, and then the 5 steps set forth. And then we have some, I call them bubbles instead of icons a lot of times, so I apologize in advance if I use that term. Legal considerations, case studies, and tools and resources. And in addition, across the top, another way to maneuver up here is that it's a drop-down menu, and you can see things as you go up here, and how this is how you contact us with comments. So if afterwards you all have comments that you think of later, please go ahead and send a note and I will get it. And I want to give thanks to Sea Grant for hosting this. Jay Clark is an amazing wizard. He's their communications director, and he helped to create this. So he gets all credit if it looks good. If it looks bad, it's me. All right, so I'm going to start out and show you the executive summary and things to know. Because start in the very beginning, it's a very good place to start. And it's simply setting forth, what does this guide do? It provides some best practices for fostering planning at the local level with full community engagement, using various tools and approaches to identify vulnerable areas and minimize community risk, and enabling economic drivers and robust planning to support community relocation when necessary. Because if you're looking to move people away from the risk, that's what you do when the other things just are not going to work. It's not going to be enough. And who are the intended users of the guide? I just mentioned that. It's local elected officials, government staff, and community leaders as they undertake resilience planning. And I refer people there to the DCR pages because it's very important in Virginia to see what we've already done. And also refer them to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund page about resilience planning. Some reasons about why to use the guide: to identify risks and vulnerabilities, consider potential distinct impacts, plan solutions, make some difficult decisions. Try to say that right up front, say it often. This is hard work. And then I call this things you need to know about adaptation planning, hoping to get people's eye, frankly, to catch their eye. It's some background material that seems important enough to not bury it throughout the guide. And I got some feedback early on from one of the people that I consulted with on this about, wouldn't it be great to have a spot that local staff can refer their elected officials to see some of this important background information so that they don't have to go through the whole thick guide, but they can get some idea up front about this is why we're trying to engage in this kind of planning. So again, here I list the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan, the Flood Protection Master Plan. What is resilience? It may sound like a dumb question, but a lot of times, people don't realize there are numerous definitions out there, and each community really has to decide what they're going to deem to be resilience for purposes of their planning. I give a suggestion about the RAFT, which is a 3-university project that's done with UVA, ODU, and Virginia Tech, where we work with local governments and score how much resilience is incorporated in their plans and their ordinances, and then help work with them for a year to become more resilient. Lisa can tell us more about that. And Jackie, we've done the Middle Peninsula and the Northern Neck and the Eastern Shore. And adaptation does not have to be a sudden upheaval. It's very community specific. Tipping points is a concept that I'm sure you all have heard of, in that it's getting more traction. I presented this guide during formation to the Bay Program's Climate Resilience Work Group, and they were great. Folks from the science and policy world from Virginia and Maryland. And one person spoke up and said, I've done research with a number of Maryland communities, and this concept of deciding the point when you're going to, do some action or leave didn't resonate. They said, we don't know what that point is because we haven't lived through it, but we know that when we get to that point, we want a really good plan that we can rely on and use. And so this concept of tipping points, that it's an iterative plan, is something that's gotten a lot of traction. We even have a case study on it. And then the concept of moving out of harm's way, which is another way of saying managed retreat, but I'm not going to embrace that term because I think that that's going to be a trigger for some people. But the truth is, we're just moving people out of harm's way when necessary. So whether we call it managed retreat, climate displacement, strategic relocation, or any other name, local governments need to discuss this as an option when the risk is too great. So if there are other things that you think I should be covering up front here in this kind of executive summary kind of context, please let me know. But these are things that seem to often be questions brought up by local governments and communities as they're doing their adaptation planning. So I am now going to go, let me move this back to the home page. And again, you can move around the site by these bubbles or icons, click on them, or you can go up here to the contents and user guide, and that will let you go back and forth between these different areas. The user guide is how to use the guide. The first one is why to use this guide, who's the intended audience, and this is how to use it. And kind of walks people through, where are you in the planning process? What do you want to do? So if you want to research various options available to mitigate or adapt, see step 2. If you have assessed your community's risks already and you've worked with your community to decide which options to pursue, step 3 will help you to develop the plan. If you need funding, as we all do, step 4, etc. And then a table of contents that also is a way to negotiate around the guide by clicking on the various links. It can take you to different spots. So that's the general background. I'm just going to show you a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and then we can come back in the Q&A to that executive summary and things you need to know to see if you all think we should add some more to that. I'm going to go to funding because it's always show me the money, right? That's a big concern. And there's a lot of info under funding and financing, right? There's a lot going on there. So we have a little mini table of contents here just to help sort through it. There are some things covered in here that I hope eventually that I can just refer people to the DCR master plan that hadn't been included in the first iteration. So I'll show you that as we go down like parametric insurance, and I'm hoping they'll cover that and I can just do one-stop shopping, reference people there for some basic info. So here's some tips about, and Jackie, you'll be glad to know Louis took a look at this because Louis Lawrence, as we know, is the king of getting funding. And funding challenges that we outline. About FEMA funding being insufficient to cover the full cost of flood loss. Funding may not be available to assist all vulnerable residents due to the benefit cost analyses that are used. It can be challenging to apply for grant funds. You all, I'm sure, know that. You've lived that. But in this sense, we're talking about how sometimes people will say, why don't you apply for a loan for XYZ community that really needs help, but they're not a separate town. They're not a legal entity that can apply for grant funds. And so you have to take that into account. The timing, and this is where Louis often will weigh in, the timing has to be right. A grant has to be upfront spending and submitted for reimbursement. So you need to have the funding available. Then we just have an overview of the major funding and financing categories. Here's an example of catastrophe bonds and resilience bonds weren't covered in the first round of the master plan. We're hoping that they'll be covered in the next round, but we give a description. Environmental impact bonds, same thing. Go into taxes and fees because that is a source, unpopular as it may be, of funding. And so we do TIFs, tax increment financing, stormwater utility fees, service district fees, etc. Parametric insurance, potential funding through our having a Sentinel landscape declared here in Virginia. The Community Reinvestment Act is what I wanted to point out. It's a newer source of some funding. As you all probably know, the Community Reinvestment Act was enacted to try to get funding to formerly redlined communities. And they have been changing their regulations so that banks, when they have to engage in what they deem to be qualifying activities to earn CRA credits in those target communities. And that has the definitions have been changed to allow those to be climate related projects. And so that can be helpful to steer funding to a community as well. The Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund. The Coastal Resilience and Trees Fund is one that is administered by Wetlands Watch. And it's been paused, unfortunately, at the moment, but they're hoping to restart it because the funding's from the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And as the deed recordation fees have reduced, the funding has reduced. And we try to cover some innovative ideas in these sections too. So talking about setting aside a portion of real estate tax revenue, and talking about how some places have talked about state government subsidized insurance that would take obviously a change in Virginia to enable it. The intent in including some of these innovative ideas is to prompt discussion if it's things that local governments and PDCs might be interested in pursuing and talking to VACO or VML about, just so that people can see the ideas that are out there. So I'm going to go back, and I think next I'm going to show you in step 2, which is strategy development. This is the long behemoth of a section, so I had to actually split it into approach 1, approach 2, and approach 3. Approach 1 being reducing risk by limiting development and preserving green space in high-risk areas. Approach 2 being reducing risk to buildings. It's with mitigation and adaptation measures. So it's to buildings, infrastructure management, historic and cultural heritage sites, and with green and gray infrastructure. And approach 3 being when those mitigation and adaptation measures are not enough, planned relocation away from the risk. So I'm going to show you quickly the historic and cultural heritage sites, just because a lot of times that's not covered quite as much as other things. So just an interesting one to look at in our overview. And so setting forth, the communities can consider 3 strategies when you're undertaking adaptation planning for these kinds of sites. You can modify it, you can relocate it, or you can abandon it. And frankly, all three of those are not particularly appealing because they cost money and you, in some cases, if you abandon, you're walking away from it, but you're admitting that we can't save everything. And that's what I mean by difficult choices. The example that we give, some of these beautiful photos were taken by me of Mandeville, Louisiana, where it was actually a resort community built for people in New Orleans back in the day that wanted to get across the Lake Pontchartrain and get away from the city. And so they have some very historic homes in very flood-prone areas. And they started seeing people raise them up and it looked really bad. So they developed their own design standards to help guide that effort so that at least you don't have this big run of stairs up the front anymore. They're telling you to put them on the side or the garage on the side. The Point neighborhood in Newport, Rhode Island is a famous one because Doris Duke paid to move these historic homes there when a highway was coming through. And now they're subject to sea level rise. And so talking about what they're trying to do to deal with that. And then show some relocation examples for historic sites. And then abandonment. Wow, what a tough choice in any context, including historic and cultural resources. Scotland, I heard a presentation in one of the Keeping History Above Water conferences from someone with Scottish heritage. And he said, we realize that we have so much coast, we can't save all of our castles. We couldn't. So we're going to save a few and have to abandon the rest and put up signage so that people know the history. It's really tough. It's tough to make that decision. Interestingly enough, when you go to their website, of course, they don't say that right up front, but they talk about making decisions. And so it's something for us all to keep in mind. All right, last thing I'm going to show you a couple things, the legal considerations. And this was actually first started by me back in the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, the first TAC, when they wanted that relocation handbook and they asked me to write the legal chapter and then it never went anywhere. So I started doing legal considerations then. And I cover things that are Virginia specific, like the Dillon Rule and private property rights, shifting property lines with sea level rise, and frankly with riverine flooding too. Mandatory regional water supply planning, that's something that came out of the lunch and learn session for Wetlands Watch. They thought that I should cover that because that's a big change. The fact that we have independent cities, which makes planning more difficult than in states where it's not independent. Cooperative purchasing by public bodies is something that's available now where a local government could partner with their PDC to get some services under an RFP issued by the PDC. Downzoning and just because I refuse to give up hope on the use of rolling easements, I really hope that we can get them here eventually. And so talk about that some. I always joke that if you think it's a good idea, then you can call it the Andrews rolling easement. If you hate it, it's a stupid idea. I don't know where the idea came from. But just try to go through some of the authorities that could be relied upon for that and trying to get it in Virginia. And then finally, tools and resources. I presented this to the, when it was under development, to the Virginia Association of Coastal PDCs. And one person there said, well, this right here is alone enough reason to have the guide because it really, we pulled together a lot of tools here. There are a lot of VIMS tools in here, Kirk, as there should be for a Virginia guide. And we tried to split it out some, developed by federal agencies, other tools, Virginia specific tools. As you can see, it's a lot. And so this is why we try to split it up by topic, including specifically ones for heat and for funding and for green infrastructure and historic and cultural sites. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over for questions. I can stop sharing so I can see you all. Does anyone have suggestions or thoughts about that? And please, again, there's no pride of authorship. If you think it should be organized a different way or has to have other things added, I would love to hear from you.
And I know this group isn't shy. Come on.
Well,
Go ahead.
Kirk.
Hey, hi, Elizabeth. That looks like pretty comprehensive, so impressive. I was wondering that you might want to try to add in something from the Adapt VA site a little bit more for localities, which would be the infrastructure road flooding component, because I know a lot of the local governments are really interested in that component of what the prediction. This is going to be VDOT's addition to this. This is their guide for what the infrastructure flooding is going to look like in the next 2050. And so I don't see that in I see some references to Adapt VA, but particularly for vulnerabilities associated with road networks for local governments and local areas, I think that would be useful.
Thank you. And is there a specific, it's on the Adapt VA site?
Yep.
So I can find it when I go hunting?
Yep.
Thank you. Great, thanks. And I should have shown, I have an acknowledgement section where I thank folks with whom I consulted. And it's, in fact, I should show that because I don't like not saying thank you. So, I had a number of folks who helped out and reviewed it, and including as I mentioned, the Chesapeake Bay Program's Climate Resiliency Work Group. I have a colleague at Atlantic Union Bank in Richmond. She came and spoke at one of our VCPC conferences, and she helped out a lot with the Community Reinvestment Act information. And as you could see, an array of folks. So I want to say thank you to all of them. Sorry, Eldon, I just can't get by without saying thanks. So, all right, back we go. Thank you, Kirk. Are there some other thoughts or ideas?
Harrison, you want to weigh in with your comment in the chat?
Yeah, so DCR has a link to this. I always forget the name. It's called the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer. It was something done during the Northam administration, I think. And if you click on the link, actually, if I can share my screen, I can just show you guys real quick what it does.
Awesome.
Jillian, can you?
Oh, I already have the power. Okay. Okay. So this might be something that could be really helpful to list on your website. So basically, this is all coming at related to Conserve Virginia. Don't fully remember what it is, but long story short, this does a lot of conservation planning stuff. So big things, for example, ecological cores, natural land network, forest conservation values, if this will ever load. Watershed impact model. Actually, that one's not that helpful. Ag model, development vulnerability model, national wetlands inventory, etc. And this might be something you might want to just link as a helpful resource, because this could definitely inform on how a locality might want to target certain areas in a resiliency plan. So the main thing about this is it's supposed to use based off of Conserve Virginia. So there's a whole lot of different things that have been identified as what the state of Virginia wants to conserve. And they do have things like floodplains and flooding resilience, water quality, etc. So this might be something you might want to include. Here in Culpeper, it's not codified, but what we like to do when we do our staff reports for certain like rezonings and conditional use permits, we like to look at, ecological cores, ecological cores, natural land network, national wetlands inventory, and just the streams, just to get our streams all together.
That's great. Thank you. So where would you suggest we put it? Because I thought I don't want to go hunting right now, but I thought I had that in there, but I want to make sure it's in the right spot.
I did see that you had a general DCR link. I just don't know if there was a direct link to the map, and that one, I don't know. I mean, it could be in the tools and resources. That could be, excuse me. That could be a place to have it.
How about because I segment the tools, would it be under green infrastructure tool or more general planning tool, you think?
Oh, this is definitely general planning tool.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no worries.
And Bryant Bays has put a chat in. You want to weigh in, Bryant?
Sure, and sorry if I missed this in some of the website. I didn't look at every single page as you were talking, but I didn't notice anything specific to like forestry and conservation of forest land, although there are some references to that in the green infrastructure section. So there are a few publications that the green infrastructure did with a lot of partners that had some great strategies, I think, for resilient coastal forestry and some ideas for both urban and rural localities for management of forestry in the long term.
Thank you, Brian. So I see you posted, is this a link to those? Let me click on this, what you put in the chat.
Yeah, that's a link to their first publication. There's a few others just on the green infrastructure website that I can send along as well.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. And in fact, let me put my email in. The chat, so that if anyone wants to send comments to me, please do. Or there's also that link in the guide. But yeah, that's really helpful. I would love to add more about forestry. And so, Brian, would you mind sending me those are the links?
Sure, will do.
Wet Cat. I see Wet Cat. Thank you, Kurt.
What is Wet Cat?
It's a tool that's used by DEQ. I mean, I'll let you explain it, Kurt, because you guys developed it.
Sure,
But
it's a tool that DEQ uses for wetlands condition assessment. It has a number of other features, but it kind of outlines what wetlands, what their condition is, provides local government, really the state, with prioritization on what wetland areas are most important for water quality and habitat as they do their regulatory aspect of wetlands reviews.
so tell me how best to incorporate that, you think, into the guide if it's being used by like community leaders and local government staff and also electeds, but where do you think is the best spot to put that?
For Wet Cat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking either under your general tools or under the green section,
Thank you.
green infrastructure section. It also
Thank
has the ability to look at if you're, if for flooding situations, what's the best place really to be restoring wetlands or preserving wetlands in regard to inundation of homes and businesses. It's got some vulnerability indexes in it.
So, but you can also do that on AdaptVA's map, right? So
It's a little bit different. But AdaptVA actually has Wet Cat in it as well.
thank you. And then I see Lisa, I think, let me go back, scrolling up, didn't you have a comment? Yeah, I find that fascinating because yesterday I participated in this session conducted by consultants for the state on development of the statewide flood master plan. And one of my requests of them was, can you incorporate into this flagging the need to plan for upland migration of wetlands? Vim's taught me well, plan ahead of time so that you're not stuck at the time. And when sea level rises enough and your wetlands are inundated, they can't go upland. And so I hope they're going to incorporate those concepts into that statewide flood plan. And wetlands credits and banks can play a key role if a community targets well, to a certain area. But are you saying, Lisa, that that's something that needs to be called out more clearly in the planning section, the planning for?
Yeah, it's probably a reflection of my lack of knowledge of the whole wetland banking tool, if you will, and how that could be used, if at all, to help homeowners and or localities if properties need to be abandoned in the future. And if that's even an appropriate tool for that. But I'm just thinking easing sort of the fiscal pain is like, okay, if it can't be used for humans, can we at least get some financial benefit from it if it were to be permanently taken
Like
over.
establish wetland banks in areas
Yeah.
that are gonna be, yeah, encourage those. Okay, thank you. I hope you can't hear that someone just took a blowing outside my window. Sorry, all, if you can. Murphy's rule, right? It's gonna happen, right? When you, all right, did I get everybody's comments? Did I miss anything in the chat box?
I don't see anything else. Other comments or suggestions? Okay. General,
Thank you.
go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Um, uh, General question for the group. Do you think, and Elizabeth, I appreciate you doing this. It works well with this group because these are the folks who would be using something like that. We move to the commission level. It's the electeds. It's really nice that they know about it, but it's not something that they're going to get very hands-on with. And just is it worth informing them with a higher level presentation at a future River Basin Commission meeting? I'd like to hear what folks on here think. Okay. Not a lot of excitement. All right. If folks have time and you can look, because I would, you could spend hours going through your site, and as people do that, take some time and look at it. Please provide comments to Elizabeth.
Yes. Please do, because it will only be as good and as useful as the input that I get on it is, because you get lost, you can't see the forest for the trees after a while, writing up all of this stuff, as I converted, research into a guide online. So would really appreciate your feedback on, what are the things, like that was helpful to hear. You use Adapt VA for road planning a lot, then we need to flag that and make that a bigger thing. And if there are other tools, by the way, Kirk, at VIMS that you think should be featured, then please let me know, because they are peppered throughout the tools appendix.
Sure, and there is one that I think, and it's not necessarily a tool, I have to go back and look, but it was a report that I think would be useful to include at some point, which is, regarding farmland. The farmers are going to are getting hit with this as well, and it's kind of looking at what are the vulnerabilities of farmland and what are the options to try to continue to get income even if there's a shift in crops and things of that sort. So I think that might be helpful, because in a lot of these communities, the farmers are at the front line for some of this flooding and saltwater intrusion.
Would you mind sending me the link, Kurt?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll have to look it up. I'll have to send you
Right.
separately.
Thank you. And thank you, John. I saw your note that you're going to take a look and review it. Appreciate that.
Yeah, a question for you on the Scotland case study. Did they actually talk about how they prioritized what to save and what not? I just, you mentioned that being a difficult discussion, and I think that's an understatement.
It really is. And, another one where that comes up is cemeteries. Like, what do you do with cemeteries that are in inundated areas? It's such a tough decision. So we do have, I think, a case study on a Maryland cemetery and what they're doing. He talked about the fact that there are members of the public who aren't going to like, right? The ones who traditionally come and visit that castle, they're not going to like this decision, and they know that. I think they had historians weigh in on a couple things. He talked about, of course, historic value, but and I don't mean like dollar value, I mean like the value to history. But also the one that he featured in particular was where it was located. Like, he showed photos of one that was so close down to the water. He said, there's no way that we can really save this. It would cost so many millions There's no way that we could save that. And so that's the one you have to kind of give up. So it kind of implies that the experts took some criteria and applied them. But after I'd seen that presentation and heard his comments that of course were not written down as part of the presentation, right? Because he could talk frankly in the room about that. When I went to the website, it wasn't set forth as clearly. They just talked about the need to consider it. But community, I think that what I'm trying to get across in this guide is that communities need to face these issues sooner rather than later, right? And the sooner you plan, then frankly, the less expensive and the less property and life loss there is, right? If for areas that are so at risk. And trying to think of ways to have a glide path and not a crash and burn. Trying to think of ways to get to a safer place with your community. And thank you, Kurt. And still retain some funding. I mean, frankly, if you tell a locality, you've just got to move everybody out of here, not only is that completely disruptive to the residents, right? They lose all their social ties, but they've lost all that tax base. They don't want to talk about that. So coming up, like Lisa said, is there a way through wetlands banks, through creative thinking of trying to come up with the funding, the income you need to get through and find a way to get people to safer ground and provide for things like wetlands corridors to migrate upland, try to think about it holistically sooner rather than later. That's the goal. But it is not easy, and political will, that's what, Jackie, that's what Louis always says, right? It takes political will. When push comes to shove, somebody's going to have to make the tough decision. Are we going to? Yeah, right, John. Changing human behavior is hard. And that's why it's like, the more that we can talk about that up front, and the more that you get the residents thinking about that up front, then it seems like it will increase the need, the desire to plan for it. It'll normalize it that you talk about it. It's not such a, oh, no, we can't talk about it.
Yeah. Serious community engagement.
Yes. And that's why it's such a focus in this guide about how to get the full community engaged, because you're exactly right, Eldon. Serious, like big lift community engagement.
Yeah. Okay. Again, if folks have other thoughts after leaving here, please communicate them to Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, thank you very, very much. I'm going to quickly move to the other agenda items. All right, review of key water resources legislation from 2025 General Assembly session. I was going to share a document with you that I'm working on for the River Basin Commission meeting that goes over open space, land conservation, land use, water resources, and other environmental, electric, power. And the governor's deadline for action is the 24th, midnight. So I put the document together, but I share with you the document today, and I'm going to rewrite all the final actions on Tuesday, the day before the commission meeting, because there'll be a number of vetoes, and so I just didn't see the point in sharing with you something right now that you're going to throw in the trash come Tuesday morning. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to send out the document as it stands to the commission members probably either tomorrow or Friday, and I'll be happy to share with everybody that's on this meeting. I'll include you on the email or in a separate email, but just know that it's dynamic. I'm going to revise it on Tuesday, bring it up to date, assuming that LIS will have everything posted. I'm counting on that, and actually share the more final version with everybody at the commission meeting. And I apologize by that. When I put that on the agenda, I didn't look closely enough at the timing for the final actions by the governor. Now, of course, the governor may send down, and I expect he will, amendments to some of those bills. Amendments can be accepted or rejected by the assembly on a straight majority vote. So there still will be some dynamics. The assembly reconvenes on April 2nd. Obviously, any veto that the governor puts on a bill, it is highly, highly unlikely that a veto will be overridden on a two-thirds majority vote of each chamber. There was only one bill last year that even got close, and I don't think that'll be the case. But if he sends amendments, some will be accepted. Some it only has to be rejected by one of the chambers on a simple majority vote. And then what happens? Here's your civics lesson. It goes back to the governor. He's got 30 days, and he's got a binary decision. He can either sign it or veto it outright. No more amendments are in play at that point. So if the assembly decides to reject the governor's amendment, they run the risk that the total bill could be lost. And then, that's another 30 days after April 6th. So it's really the 1st of May before the total process is wrapped up. I don't think there'll be that many that'll be in that category. We had an awful lot of legislation where the commission meeting is going to be consumed mostly with hearing from Jay Lark on data centers. And there were a few pieces of legislation that got to the governor's desk on data centers, primarily giving local government a little more authority to request studies by the applicants on rezonings or special exceptions. I don't have an inkling of what the governor's going to do with that legislation. It was a compromise that was sought, and it wasn't a strict party line vote. There was bipartisan, not overwhelmingly, but there was bipartisan support. All right, going forward, we meet again on the 23rd of April. I've had a request from Michelle that we talk a little bit about regional water supply planning. Everybody should have had their kickoff meetings or at least scheduled. I see some in some parts of the state are still in the process of being scheduled. Question to everybody here: would you like me to invite the Whedon or one of his staff just to come back and give a recap of where they stand with all those kickoff meetings and what are some of the hot topics that have come out of those meetings, well beyond this basin? Would that be worth some time? And then we have some of our own discussion. John Bateman says yes.
Yeah, Eldon, that would be great. And I'd also be curious what, if anything, folks are planning on doing with the grant money that has been the tiny little bit, the $8,000 kind of thing.
Up $298.
Yeah.
All right, I will invite someone from that office and see if they can join us and kind of give a recap. And then maybe what we could do is a little bit of round robin. What has gone on? Lisa, what have y'all done? And Michelle, same way. Well, we can hear from GWRC and let's see, Jackie left us. So yeah, we'll kind of go around and see how those kickoff meetings have gone. And I'd also like to hear, when we invite folks from the state, if there were some discussions from other parts of the state that we might want to be aware of. Somebody having a bright idea, I don't know. And then how you're using the money. That's good. All right. Also, I would expect coming out of the commission meeting, I'm anticipating a robust discussion after the JLARC presentation on data centers. We may have a task or two that gets thrown our way by the commission. So more to come. I don't have a good prediction of what that might be at this point. I just know there's a healthy degree of interest. John, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, Eldon, we've recently in the last 6 months had some interest from data center developers here in Lancaster. And so I'm very interested to hear about that at the commission meeting, and the ties to the water supply are pretty evident. So the water supply planning as that goes forward is going to be an important topic of conversation for us, because that was kind of our first point to them, is that we're in a groundwater management area. So
okay. Can they use salt water?
can they use nuclear energy?
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, avoiding the water, they just, it demands more electricity if they're not going to use water as the cooler. So there's that big trade-off there, and you're going to hear that in the JLARC presentation. They're gonna focus more on the natural resource and energy side rather than some of the other issues, just because of who the commission is. And the two staff members that will be with us will probably be able to answer any kind of crazy question that gets thrown at them. So I encourage anybody interested, if you're not going to be in attendance at the commission meeting next week, certainly we'd be happy to have you beam in and listen. And it'll be recorded, so you'll be able to go back just like we do with all the meetings. Okay, anything else that we need to cover? And gonna let everybody get back to their day. Okay, I will include everybody when I distribute the commission meeting materials either tomorrow or Friday, and I'll follow up with you when we do the revision. When we do a cramming before the exam, revision to that legislative document the day before the commission meeting. And how did we plan that way? I don't know. But anyway, thank you everybody for being with us. Any final thoughts before we sign off? Great. Elizabeth, thank you again. Kurt, great to see you.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your comments, y'all.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Tommy, you doing all right? No, no, no.